The sound of boots striking hardwood broke the tense silence in the smoky saloon as Fiona Jackson stared in horror at the papers before her. The ink still wet on the contract that had just sold her life away. It was 1875 in Dallas, Texas, and her brother Thomas had just gambled away more than money he had gambled away her freedom. "You can't do this, Thomas," Fiona whispered, her voice trembling as she looked up at her brother's face, pale and sweating in the dim lamplight. "I'm not cattle to be traded." Thomas couldn't meet her eyes. At 26, he was 4 years her senior, but in this moment he looked like a frightened boy. "I had no choice, Fiona. Devlin said he'd kill me if I didn't pay. This buys us time." Fiona's hands shook as she clutched the rough fabric of her dress. At 22, she had survived the loss of their parents to cholera, managed their small ranch alone while Thomas drifted in and out of gambling halls, and now this being signed away to work off his $5,000 debt to Dallas's most notorious saloon owner. Silas Devlin, a man with cold eyes and a reputation as black as the suit he wore, folded the contract and slipped it inside his vest pocket. "Your sister will work in my establishment until the debt is paid. Consider yourself lucky, Jackson. Most men who cross me don't walk away." Thomas swallowed hard. How long will she have to work?" Devlin's smile never reached his eyes. "At the rate I pay, 7 years, give or take, unless, of course, she finds other ways to earn." His gaze slid over Fiona in a way that made her skin crawl. "I won't," Fiona began, but Devlin cut her off. "You will do as you're told, Miss Jackson. Your brother has made certain of that." The saloon doors swung open, and several men entered, shaking trailed dust from their hats and coats. Fiona barely noticed them through her tears. Her mind was racing through options that weren't there. Their small ranch was mortgaged to the bank already. They had no family to turn to. She was trapped. "Report tomorrow at noon," Devlin said, "and wear something nicer than those rags." He turned and walked away, leaving Fiona and Thomas alone in their shame. "I'm sorry," Thomas whispered. "I'll find a way to fix this." Fiona couldn't respond. His promises meant nothing now. They'd heard them too many times before. One of the newcomers approached the bar, a tall man whose presence seemed to fill the room. Fiona noticed how the other patrons gave him space, nodding respectfully as he passed. His dark hat shadowed his face, but she caught the glint of observant eyes as they swept across the saloon, pausing briefly on her tear-streaked face. "Whiskey," he said to the bartender, his voice deep and steady. "Yes, Mr. Ryder," the bartender replied, quickly pouring a drink. Fiona tugged at her brother's arm. "Let's go home. We need to talk about this." Thomas nodded, looking defeated as they stepped out into the Texas night. Neither of them noticed the tall stranger watching them leave, nor the way he leaned toward the bartender with quiet questions after they'd gone. Dawn broke harshly the next morning, the sun climbing above the flat horizon to cast long shadows across the Jackson ranch. It wasn't much a small house, a barn in need of repair, and a few acres for their horses and cattle. Once, their father had dreamed of building it into something grand. Now, it was all Fiona had left, and soon she would lose even this. She'd barely slept, spending the night alternating between rage and despair. Thomas had retreated to his room with a bottle, leaving her alone to face what was coming. She stood at the kitchen window, watching the dust devils dance across the yard. When she heard hoofbeats approaching, her heart sank, expecting Devlin or one of his men coming to ensure she didn't run. Instead, she saw a stranger riding a magnificent black stallion. It was the man from the saloon Mr. Ryder, the bartender had called him. Fiona quickly wiped her eyes and smoothed her hair before stepping onto the porch. The rider dismounted with an easy grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. Up close, She could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw darkened by stubble and eyes the color of a storm-tossed sea. "Miss Jackson?" he asked, removing his hat. "Yes," she answered warily. "What business do you have here, Mr. Ryder?" "Kyle Ryder." He held his hat against his chest. "I've come about your situation with Silas Devlin." Fiona stiffened. "Are you one of his men?" A brief smile crossed his face. "No, madam, quite the opposite." "Then what do you want?" Kyle Ryder glanced at the house behind her. "Is your brother home?" "This concerns him too." Fiona hesitated, then called for Thomas. He emerged looking haggard, red-eyed from drink and lack of sleep. "Who's this?" Thomas asked, squinting at their visitor. "My name is Kyle Ryder. I have a proposition that might interest you both." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked heavily as he set it on the porch railing. $5,000, Fiona gasped. "What?" "To pay your brother's debt to Devlin, in full." Thomas stepped forward, suspicion fighting with desperate hope on his face. "Why would you do that? What do you want in return?" Kyle's expression remained neutral. "Nothing from your sister, if that's what you're thinking. The money is a payment, not a loan." "Nobody just gives away $5,000, Fiona said, crossing her arms. "I have my reasons for wanting to see Devlin lose," Kyle replied. "Let's just say we have history." Fiona and Thomas exchanged glances. It seemed too good to be true, yet the weight of the money pouch was real enough. "There must be a catch," Fiona insisted. Kyle looked at her directly. "The only condition is that you, Miss Jackson, take this money to Devlin yourself, today. Tell him the debt is paid and your contract is void." "Why?" she asked. "I want him to know he's been beaten. I want to see his face when he realizes it." There was something in Kyle's voice that suggested deeper currents of anger than his calm exterior showed. Thomas reached for the money pouch, but Kyle moved it away slightly. "Not so fast. I want your word, both of you. Once this debt is paid, Thomas walks away from Devlin's tables forever." Thomas swallowed hard, nodding. "I swear it. And you, Miss Jackson, what will you do after this is settled?" Fiona hadn't thought past the nightmare of her impending servitude. Freedom suddenly restored left her momentarily wordless. I'll keep running our ranch, it's all I have." Kyle nodded, seemingly satisfied. He handed her the pouch. "I'll accompany you to town, but you'll deal with Devlin. I'd prefer to remain in the background for now." "Why are you really doing this?" Fiona asked, weighing the heavy pouch in her hands. Kyle's eyes darkened. "Let's just say I believe in justice, Miss Jackson. And what Devlin tried to do to you was far from just." An hour later, Fiona sat straight-backed in her father's old buckboard wagon as Kyle rode alongside on his stallion. The trip to Dallas was quiet, giving her time to study her mysterious benefactor. He rode with the easy confidence of a man at home on horseback, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, alert to every movement. There was something about him that spoke of danger, yet she felt oddly safe in his presence. "You're not just a rancher, are you, Mr. Ryder?" she finally asked as the town came into view. He glanced at her with a hint of a smile. "What makes you say that? The way you move. The way people looked at you in the saloon. You're somebody." "I was a Texas Ranger for 8 years, he admitted. "Retired 2 years ago." That explained the respect he commanded. Rangers were legend in Texas, tough men who brought law to lawless territories. "And now I own the Double R Ranch outside of town, trying to build something lasting." They fell silent as they entered Dallas proper. The town was bustling with noon activity, cowboys, merchants, ladies with parasols, all moving along the boardwalks that lined the dusty Main Street. Devlin's Palace Saloon stood 3 stories tall, its painted facade and gilt lettering a testament to its owner's prosperity and ego. Fiona felt her courage faltering as they approached. Kyle seemed to sense her fear. "Remember, Miss Jackson, you hold the power now. Walk in there like you own the place." She nodded, gripping the money pouch tightly as she climbed down from the wagon. Kyle dismounted and tied both their horses to the hitching post. "I'll be right behind you," he assured her. Inside, the saloon was quieter than the previous night, but still housed a dozen or so early drinkers and card players. Heads turned as Fiona entered, an uncommon sight in a place usually frequented by men and saloon girls. She spotted Devlin at his usual table in the corner, counting money with his bookkeeper. Drawing a deep breath, she walked directly to him. Kyle moved to the bar, watching from a distance. "Miss Jackson," Devlin said, his surprise turning to a predatory smile. "Eager to begin your employment, I see, though you've ignored my advice about your attire." Fiona placed the leather pouch on the table, sending several coins rolling across the green felt. "I've come to pay my brother's debt in full." Devlin's smile faltered. "That's not how our arrangement works." "There is no arrangement." Fiona's voice grew stronger. $5,000, count it, the contract is void." Devlin's eyes narrowed as he glanced toward the bar, spotting Kyle. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by something like fear. "Ryder," he muttered. "So that's how it is." The bookkeeper quickly counted the money, nodding to confirm the amount. Devlin's jaw tightened as he reached into his vest pocket and withdrew the contract, slapping it on the table. "Take it," he said. "Consider yourself lucky, and tell your brother he's not welcome at my tables anymore." Fiona snatched the contract, trembling with relief and lingering anger. "Gladly." As she turned to leave, Devlin called after her. "You should know who you're getting involved with, Miss Jackson. Ryder's not the hero you think he is." Fiona didn't respond, walking proudly toward the doors where Kyle waited. Together they stepped out into the Texas sunlight, Fiona clutching the torn contract in her hand. "It's done," she breathed, hardly believing it. Kyle nodded, his expression unreadable. "You're free, Miss Jackson." "What did he mean about you?" she asked. "Devlin and I have history," Kyle replied. "He doesn't like losing." "Neither do I," Fiona said. "And I'm not sure what just happened, but I know I've just been given back something precious. I owe you a debt I can't repay." Kyle helped her into the wagon. "You owe me nothing. Your freedom was never his to take." As they traveled back toward the Jackson ranch, Fiona felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. But mixed with it was curiosity about the man riding beside her and the mysteries he carried with him. Thomas was waiting anxiously on the porch when they returned. His face broke into disbelieving joy when Fiona handed him the torn contract. "It's really over?" he asked. "It's over," she confirmed. "But you made a promise, Thomas. No more gambling." Thomas nodded vigorously. "Never again, I swear it." He turned to Kyle. "Mr. Ryder, I don't know how to thank you." "You can thank me by keeping your word," Kyle said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "And by joining your sister for dinner at my ranch this Saturday." "I'd like to discuss a business proposition with you both." Fiona raised an eyebrow. "What kind of proposition?" "One that could benefit us all," Kyle replied. "The Double R needs good horses, and I hear the Jackson stock is among the best in the county." After confirming directions to his property, Kyle mounted his stallion. As he prepared to leave, Fiona stepped forward. "Mr. Ryder, I still don't understand why you did this for us." Kyle looked down at her, his eyes softening slightly. "Sometimes a man gets a chance to right a wrong. I took mine." With a tip of his hat, he rode away, leaving the siblings to ponder the day's extraordinary events. That night, Fiona sat at her kitchen table, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The contract lay torn in pieces before her, a reminder of how close she'd come to losing her freedom. Thomas had gone to bed early, exhausted by emotion and the promise of a fresh start, but sleep eluded Fiona. Kyle Ryder occupied her thoughts, his unexpected intervention, the respect he commanded, the hints of a troubled past. There was clearly more to his story than he'd shared, and Devlin's parting words suggested a darkness she couldn't fathom. Yet he had given her back her life, asking nothing in return. In the harsh world of the Texas frontier, such selflessness was as rare as rain in August. The week passed in a blur of ranch work and preparation. Saturday arrived clear and hot, with a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Fiona spent extra time on her appearance, selecting her best dress, a blue calico that matched her eyes, and arranging her chestnut hair in a simple but elegant style. Thomas teased her about her efforts, but she noticed he'd polished his boots and trimmed his beard. The Double R Ranch lay 15 miles west of town, a sprawling property marked by a grand entrance gate with the ranch's brand worked into the ironwork. As their wagon approached, Fiona gasped at the sight of the main house, a 2-story structure of stone and timber that put their modest homestead to shame. "Looks like Ranger Ryder did well for himself," Thomas muttered, clearly intimidated. A ranch hand greeted them and directed them to the house while taking care of their horses and wagon. Fiona's stomach fluttered with nerves as they approached the broad porch where Kyle stood waiting. He'd exchanged his trail clothes for clean black pants and a white shirt, though he still wore his gun belt, a reminder that in Texas, danger was never far. His face brightened when he saw them, and Fiona felt an unexpected warmth at his smile. "Welcome to the Double R," Kyle said, extending his hand to Thomas and tipping his hat to Fiona. "I'm glad you could come." The interior of the house was impressive but not ostentatious, furnished with solid pieces that spoke of permanence rather than show. Kyle led them to a dining room where a housekeeper named Mrs. Abernathy had prepared a feast that made Fiona embarrassed about the simple fare she'd been planning to offer in return. Over dinner, Kyle explained his proposition. The Double R was expanding its horse breeding operation, and he needed quality stock to start. The Jackson Ranch had a reputation for fine quarter horses, thanks to Fiona's careful breeding program. "I'm proposing a partnership," Kyle said. "I'll buy a half interest in your breeding stock and provide the resources to expand. You keep your independence and your land, but we share the profits from the foals." Thomas looked stunned. "Why us? There are bigger ranches with more horses." "Because quality matters more than quantity," Kyle replied. "And Miss Jackson has an eye for horseflesh that's becoming known even beyond Dallas County." Fiona felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected praise. "It was my father's passion. I just continued his work." "And improved upon it," Kyle added. "The bay stallion you bred from your father's stock and the Morgan mare from Austin, I've heard he's producing exceptional foals." Fiona's surprise must have shown on her face because Kyle smiled. "I do my research, Miss Jackson." After dinner, Kyle suggested a tour of his stables while Thomas remained on the porch with a cigar Kyle had offered him. As they walked side by side toward the sprawling barn, Fiona gathered her courage. "Mr. Ryder, I'm grateful for this opportunity, truly. But I can't help feeling there's something you're not telling us. Your conflict with Devlin, your interest in our small ranch. It doesn't quite add up." Kyle paused, considering her words. "You're direct, Miss Jackson. I appreciate that." He gestured toward a bench outside the barn. "Perhaps we should sit." Once seated, Kyle removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "Silas Devlin and I grew up together in East Texas. We were like brothers once until the war came. I fought for the Union, he chose the Confederacy." Fiona tensed slightly. The Civil War had ended 10 years ago, but its wounds still ran deep in Texas. That wasn't the real division between us, though, Kyle continued. After the war, we both joined the Rangers. Working to bring peace back to Texas seemed a good way to heal the past. But Devlin changed. He started taking bribes, looking the other way when certain criminals crossed our path. Kyle's eyes darkened with memory. I confronted him about it. Things escalated. There was a shootout with a gang we'd been tracking. Devlin claimed I'd fired recklessly, nearly got our whole unit killed. There was an investigation. I was cleared, but the trust was gone. I resigned my commission. And Devlin, he left the Rangers too, used his ill-gotten gains to build his saloon empire. Now he owns half the businesses in Dallas and has the other half in debt to him. Kyle looked directly at Fiona. What he tried to do to you, I've seen him do it before. Young women forced into servitude that becomes something far worse. I couldn't let it happen again. Fiona absorbed his words, sensing there was still more he wasn't saying. So this partnership offer, is it just to spite him? Kyle shook his head. No, that's the honest truth, Miss Jackson. I need good horses, and you have them. My reasons for helping you with Devlin were personal, but this business proposal stands on its own merits. Please, she said quietly, call me Fiona. A genuine smile crossed his face. Fiona, and I'm Kyle. The moment stretched between them, filled with something Fiona couldn't quite name. Then Kyle stood, offering his hand to help her up. Now about those horses. The tour of the stables revealed Kyle's substantial investment in his breeding program. His stallions were magnificent, though Fiona noted with professional pride that her own prized stud, Thunderbolt, had superior bloodlines in certain respects. Your mare barn is impressive, she said, admiring the spacious stalls and clean conditions. But you're right about needing more diversity in your stock. Kyle nodded. That's where you come in. Together, we could build something remarkable. By the time they returned to the house, the sun was setting in a spectacular display of orange and purple. Thomas and Fiona prepared to leave, the business proposition still under consideration. We'll need time to discuss it, Fiona said as Kyle helped her into the wagon. Of course. Take all the time you need. His hand lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary. But I hope you'll say yes. As they drove back toward their ranch, Thomas was uncharacteristically quiet. Finally, he spoke. Are you thinking about his offer or about him? Fiona shot her brother an irritated glance. The offer, of course. MMHMM, Thomas hummed skeptically. I saw how you looked at him, and how he looked at you. Don't be ridiculous, Fiona replied, though she felt her cheeks warm. He's a businessman making a business offer. A businessman who just happened to save you from Devlin out of the goodness of his heart, who just happened to invite us to dinner and offer a partnership that would solve all our financial troubles. Thomas shook his head. There's more to it, Fiona. She couldn't deny it. There was something about Kyle Ryder that pulled at her, his quiet strength, his sense of justice, the shadows behind his eyes that spoke of pain and resilience. But she'd learned long ago to be cautious with her heart. Whatever his reasons, she said finally, the offer makes sense for us. With his investment, we could finally make the ranch profitable enough to pay off the mortgage. Thomas nodded. I agree, and I owe you this, after what I almost cost you. Fiona reached over and squeezed her brother's hand. We move forward, not backward, Thomas. Let's focus on making this work. The next morning, Fiona rode out to check on their small herd, accompanied by the faithful border collie, Scout. The cattle looked healthy despite the dry season, and the horses even better. She paused to watch Thunderbolt, her prize stallion, as he trotted along the fence line, his powerful muscles rippling beneath his gleaming coat. What would it mean to share him with Kyle's operation? To merge their breeding programs? It was a sound business decision, but something held her back from immediate acceptance. Her thoughts were interrupted by Scout's alert barking. Turning in the saddle, she spotted a cloud of dust approaching from the direction of town. As it drew closer, she recognized Silas Devlin and two of his men. Her heart raced with sudden fear. Devlin reined in his horse a few yards away, his smile cold beneath his trimmed mustache. "Miss Jackson, what a pleasant surprise." "This is private property, Mr. Devlin," Fiona said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "You're not welcome here." "Now, is that any way to treat a visitor?" Devlin removed his hat with mock courtesy. "Especially one who's come with a warning for your benefit." Fiona's eyes narrowed. "What warning? About your new friend, Kyle Ryder?" Devlin's smile turned ugly. "Did he tell you why he really left the Rangers? About the woman who died because of him?" Fiona's stomach clenched. "I don't believe anything you say. Ask him about Sarah Collins." "Ask him what happened in Laredo." Devlin replaced his hat. "You should know what kind of man you're getting involved with, Miss Jackson. Ryder isn't the hero you think he is." "Leave my land," Fiona demanded, her hand moving instinctively to the rifle in her saddle scabbard. Devlin noticed the gesture and laughed. "No need for that. I've said what I came to say." He turned his horse. "Oh, and one more thing, Ryder may have bought your freedom, but Thomas's debts to other establishments in town remain. Smaller amounts, to be sure, but debts nonetheless." With that parting shot, he rode away, his men following close behind. Fiona watched until they disappeared over the ridge, her mind churning with questions and doubts. Who was Sarah Collins? What had happened in Laredo? And what other debts had Thomas hidden from her? She rode back to the ranch house to find Thomas splitting wood in the yard, his shirt soaked with honest sweat for a change. The sight would have pleased her on any other day. "Devlin was just at the north pasture," she said without preamble. Thomas dropped the axe, his face paling. "What did he want?" To plant doubts about Kyle, and to mention that you still have gambling debts all over town. She dismounted, confronting her brother directly. "Tell me the truth, Thomas. How much do you owe and to whom?" Thomas's shoulders slumped. "About $800 spread across 3 places. Nothing like what I owed Devlin, I swear." Fiona closed her eyes briefly, fighting for calm. $800 we don't have, not unless we accept Kyle's offer." "I'll pay it back," Thomas promised. "I'll work day and night." "You said that before." Fiona turned away, leading her horse toward the barn. "I need to think." That evening, Fiona penned a note to Kyle accepting his offer, conditional on a formal contract that protected the Jackson interests. She also added a personal postscript. "I would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you privately about a matter Silas Devlin raised today. He mentioned someone named Sarah Collins and an incident in Laredo. I do not trust his word, but I would value your honesty on this subject before we finalize our agreement." She sent Thomas to deliver the note to the Double R first thing in the morning, choosing to remain behind to tend to the ranch. By mid-afternoon, she was checking fence lines in the east pasture when she heard the now familiar sound of Kyle's stallion approaching. He rode up looking troubled, her note folded in his breast pocket. After a brief greeting, he dismounted, leading his horse to walk beside her. "You met with Devlin," he said. "It wasn't a question." "He came to the ranch uninvited," Fiona replied. "Mentioned some things I'd like to understand." Kyle's jaw tightened. "Sarah Collins." "Yes, he implied you were responsible for her death." For a long moment, Kyle was silent, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Sarah was a witness in a case against the Laredo outfit, a gang that specialized in cattle rustling and worse. Devlin and I were assigned to protect her until the trial." He paused. "She and I became close." Fiona felt an unexpected twinge of jealousy quickly suppressed. The night before she was to testify, our safe house was attacked. Somehow, they knew exactly where to find us. Kyle's hand tightened on his horse's reins. I later discovered Devlin had sold our location to the gang leader. There was a shootout. Sarah was killed. "I'm sorry," Fiona said softly. Devlin claimed I'd been careless, that my relationship with Sarah had compromised the operation. He even suggested I might have inadvertently led them to us. Kyle's eyes met hers, filled with old pain. The investigation cleared me, but the doubt remained. Devlin kept his position by shifting blame to me. "And that's why you left the Rangers." Kyle nodded. "I couldn't wear the badge alongside the man who'd betrayed everything it stood for, who'd caused the death of." He stopped, unable to continue. Fiona touched his arm gently. "You loved her." "I thought I did," Kyle admitted. Now I'm not sure if it was love or just the intensity of the situation. We were isolated, in danger. He shook his head. "It doesn't matter now. Sarah deserved justice and I couldn't give it to her." "Is that what this is about? Using me to get revenge on Devlin?" Kyle looked genuinely startled. "No, Fiona. When I saw what was happening to you in that saloon, I acted on instinct. The business proposition came later and it's genuine." His eyes held hers steadily. "I understand if you want to withdraw your acceptance." Fiona studied him, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, she made her decision. "The offer stands, but no more secrets between us, Kyle. If we're to be partners, we need trust." Relief washed over his features. "Agreed. No more secrets." They walked in companionable silence until they reached the fence line Fiona had been repairing. Without being asked, Kyle removed his coat and helped her finish the job, working efficiently beside her in the hot Texas sun. As they worked, Fiona found herself sharing stories of her own past her parents' deaths, the struggle to keep the ranch going, her brother's spiral into gambling after his sweetheart married another man. "He wasn't always like this," she said, defending Thomas despite her frustration with him. "He was the one who taught me to ride, to shoot. He stood up for me when the boys at school pulled my braids and called me freckle face." Kyle smiled at that. "Your freckles are charming." Fiona felt her cheeks warm and not from the sun. "My point is, I believe he can change. This partnership could be a fresh start for both of us." "I hope so," Kyle replied. "For his sake and yours." When the fence was repaired, Kyle insisted on riding the entire property line with Fiona, getting a feel for the land that would soon be partly under his care. By the time they returned to the ranch house, the sun was setting and a companionable ease had grown between them. "Would you join me for dinner?" Fiona asked impulsively. "It won't be as grand as Mrs. Abernathy's cooking, but I make a decent stew." Kyle accepted with a smile that transformed his serious face, making him look younger and more carefree than she'd yet seen him. Over the simple meal, with Thomas conspicuously absent having made himself scarce after delivering the note, they discussed the details of their partnership. "I'll have my lawyer draw up the contract," Kyle said. "He's honest and will ensure your interests are protected. And the debts Thomas mentioned, the $800, Kyle's expression grew serious. "Consider it an advance on your profits from our partnership, but Fiona," he hesitated. "Your brother needs more than financial help." She sighed, pushing her plate away. "I know, but I can't force him to change. Perhaps a change of scenery would help. I need a man to oversee the western section of the Double R. It's good land, but too far from the main house for proper management. There's a cabin there, comfortable enough for a single man. Thomas would have responsibility, purpose." Fiona stared at him. "You'd trust him with that?" "I'd be trusting you," Kyle replied, "and giving him a chance to prove himself away from the temptations of town." It was a generous offer, more than she'd expected. "I'll speak with him about it. Thank you." As Kyle prepared to leave, standing on the porch in the soft evening light, Fiona found herself reluctant to see him go. Something had shifted between them during the day, a foundation of trust beginning to form despite Devlin's attempts to destroy it. "Will you come to the signing of the contract?" Kyle asked. "My lawyer can have it ready by Thursday." "I'll be there," she promised. He stepped closer, hesitating before taking her hand in his. The touch sent warmth spreading up her arm. "Fiona, I want you to know what happened with Sarah was years ago. I've carried the guilt of it, but I'm not that same man anymore." She met his gaze steadily. "We all have pasts, Kyle. It's what we do now that matters." His fingers tightened briefly around hers before he released her hand. With a tip of his hat, he mounted his stallion and rode away into the gathering darkness. Fiona watched until he disappeared, her hand still tingling from his touch. Thomas returned later that evening, smelling of whiskey but not overly drunk. Fiona told him of Kyle's offer for the Western section job. To her surprise, her brother's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve that kind of trust," he said hoarsely. "Maybe not yet," Fiona agreed. "But you could earn it." Thomas nodded slowly. "I'll try, Fiona. I swear I'll try this time." As promised, Thursday brought the signing of their partnership contract. Kyle's lawyer, an elderly man named Judge Harmon, had drawn up a fair agreement that protected the Jackson interests while allowing for the growth Kyle envisioned. Thomas accompanied Fiona to town, sober and properly dressed for perhaps the first time in months. The signing took place in Judge Harmon's office, a wood-paneled room lined with law books and smelling of pipe tobacco. As Fiona added her signature to the document, she felt a curious mixture of excitement and trepidation. Her life was changing in ways she couldn't have imagined a week ago. Kyle suggested they celebrate with lunch at the hotel dining room, the most respectable establishment in Dallas. As they walked the 2 blocks from the lawyer's office, Fiona was acutely aware of the stares they attracted the notorious Jackson siblings in the company of Kyle Ryder, former ranger and one of the county's most prosperous ranchers. "People will talk," she murmured to Kyle as he held the hotel door for her. "Let them," he replied with a smile. "I've never much cared for gossip." The meal was pleasant, with Thomas on his best behavior, even engaging Kyle in thoughtful conversation about cattle breeding and water management. Fiona found herself watching the 2 men with hope. Perhaps this new arrangement really could save her brother. As they were finishing their coffee, the hotel door swung open to admit Silas Devlin and a group of well-dressed men, town councilors by the look of them. The conversation in the dining room dimmed momentarily, then resumed at a lower volume as Devlin spotted their table. With a word to his companions, he approached, his smile as false as fool's gold. "Well, isn't this cozy? The Jacksons and Ryder breaking bread together." Kyle's posture didn't change, but Fiona sensed his heightened alertness. "Devlin, I hear congratulations are in order," Devlin continued. "A new business partnership, how touching." His gaze slid to Fiona. "Though I wonder if Miss Jackson knows exactly what she's getting into, partnering with a man of your reputation." Thomas half rose from his chair, but Kyle laid a restraining hand on his arm. "We're celebrating a private business matter," Kyle said evenly. "I suggest you join your associates and leave us to our coffee." Devlin's smile thinned. "Always the gentleman in public, aren't you, Ryder? So different from that night in Laredo." He tipped his hat to Fiona. "Enjoy your lunch, Miss Jackson. Do ask your partner about the shots he fired that night sometime. About who really killed Sarah Collins." He walked away before Kyle could respond, joining the counselors at a large table across the room. The celebratory mood shattered. Kyle paid the bill quickly and escorted Fiona and Thomas outside. On the boardwalk, Thomas excused himself to check on their wagon, leaving Fiona alone with Kyle. "Is there truth to what he said?" she asked quietly. Kyle's expression was pained. "The official investigation cleared me, as I told you, but there were questions about whose bullet killed Sarah. It was chaos, Fiona. The gang burst in shooting. Devlin and I returned fire. When it was over, Sarah was dead with a bullet that could have come from any of our guns. And you never knew for certain. The bullet was never recovered. I believed I had to believe it came from one of the gang members. But Devlin, he planted doubts, suggested I'd been reckless in my shooting." Kyle's eyes met hers, haunted by old pain. "I'll never know for sure. That's the truth I've lived with." Fiona absorbed this, weighing it against everything else she knew about Kyle. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. "Devlin clearly wants to drive a wedge between us. Does he succeed?" Kyle's question was soft, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "No," Fiona said firmly. "Our partnership stands." Relief washed across Kyle's features, followed by something warmer. He offered her his arm. "Then let's not let him ruin our day." The next few weeks passed in a flurry of activity as the partnership took shape. Kyle brought several of his best mares to be bred with Thunderbolt, and Fiona selected horses from her stock to strengthen the double R bloodlines. Thomas, true to his word, immersed himself in preparations to take over the western section, spending long days learning the layout of the land and the needs of the cattle there. Fiona found herself riding to the double R almost daily, ostensibly to check on her horses, but increasingly drawn by Kyle's company. They worked well together, their different approaches to ranching complementing rather than conflicting. His more business-minded perspective balanced her intuitive connection to the animals. One evening in late August, as summer's heat began its gradual surrender to autumn, Kyle invited Fiona to dinner at the Double R. Thomas was already living at the western section cabin, so she arrived alone, dressed in her blue calico dress with her hair arranged more carefully than she'd admit. Mrs. Abernathy had outdone herself with the meal, but Fiona barely tasted the food, distracted by the way the candlelight played across Kyle's features and the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. After dinner, he suggested a walk in the garden Mrs. Abernathy had planted behind the house. The night air was still warm, scented with late-blooming roses and the distant smell of sage. "The partnership is working better than I hoped," Kyle said as they strolled between carefully tended beds. "Your brother is proving himself a capable manager." "He needed purpose," Fiona replied. "And your trust. Thank you for giving him both." Kyle stopped beside a rose bush heavy with white blooms. "And you, Fiona, are you happy with our arrangement?" She nodded, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "Very, though I miss seeing Thunderbolt every day." "You could see him daily again," Kyle said softly, "if you were here." Fiona's heart quickened. "What do you mean?" Kyle reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I mean that this partnership has shown me something I didn't expect. That you are not just a skilled horsewoman and a dedicated sister, but a woman of extraordinary strength and beauty." "Kyle," she began, but he continued, "I find myself looking forward to your visits more than any other part of my day. When you're not here, I think of reasons to ride to your ranch." His fingers tightened around hers. "I believe I'm falling in love with you, Fiona Jackson." The admission hung in the night air between them, honest and vulnerable. Fiona felt a surge of joy mingled with lingering doubt. "Is it that simple?" she asked. "After everything with Devlin, with your past?" "Nothing about it is simple," Kyle admitted, "but it's true nonetheless. I understand if you don't feel the same way." Fiona stepped closer, placing her free hand against his chest. "I didn't say that." His eyes searched hers, hope kindling. "Then you might." "I might already," she whispered, "despite my best efforts not to." The smile that transformed his face was worth every moment of doubt she'd experienced. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, Kyle leaned down to brush his lips against hers in a kiss so tender it made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. When they parted, he kept her hand in his. "I don't expect an answer tonight. I just wanted you to know where I stand." Fiona nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. They finished their walk in comfortable silence, the night somehow more beautiful than before. As Kyle helped her into her wagon for the ride home, he pressed a single white rose into her hand. "Think about it," he said simply. She did think about it, all through the night and into the following days. The idea of loving Kyle, of being loved by him, filled her with both joy and fear. So much had happened so quickly. Weeks ago, she had faced a future of servitude. Now she was considering a future with one of the most respected men in the county. Thomas noticed her distraction when he came to the ranch for supplies. "He's asked you, hasn't he?" her brother said with unusual perception. "Ask me what?" Fiona replied, pretending to focus on the inventory list before her, to marry him, or at least to consider it. Fiona looked up, startled. "How did you know?" Thomas smiled, a genuine expression she'd seen too rarely in recent years. "The way he looks at you. And the way you look at him when you think no one's watching." "It's too soon," she protested weakly. "Is it? Sometimes life moves at its own pace, Fiona." Thomas's expression grew serious. "He's a good man, better than I gave him credit for at first. He's been fair with me, patient when I make mistakes." Fiona studied her brother, noting the healthy color in his face, the clear eyes, the steadier hands. The change in him over these weeks was remarkable. "Are you happy at the Double R?" she asked. "Happier than I've been in years," Thomas admitted. "I feel useful there. Respected." His words echoed in her mind as she rode to the Double R the next day, intending to give Kyle her answer. But as she approached the main house, she saw several horses tied outside that she didn't recognize, town horses, not ranch mounts. Mrs. Abernathy met her at the door, her normally placid face creased with worry. "Miss Jackson, thank goodness. The sheriff's here with bad news." Heart pounding, Fiona rushed into the study where Kyle stood facing Sheriff Taylor and two deputies. All four men turned as she entered. "What's happened?" she demanded. Kyle crossed to her side immediately. "Devlin's dead, shot last night in his office above the saloon." Fiona gasped. "That's terrible. But why is the sheriff here?" Sheriff Taylor, a stocky man with graying whiskers, cleared his throat. "We're investigating, Miss Jackson. Mr. Devlin was killed with a Colt .45, same caliber as the gun your brother carries. And Thomas Jackson was seen entering the saloon shortly before the shooting." "That's impossible," Fiona protested. "Thomas was at the western section. He was in town yesterday," Kyle interrupted gently. "Remember, he came for supplies." Fiona's mind raced. Yes, Thomas had been at their ranch, had mentioned going to town afterward for some personal items. But murder? "Where is he now?" "That's just it," Sheriff Taylor said. "No one's seen him since last night. He's not at his cabin nor at your ranch. He appears to have fled." Kyle's hand found hers, squeezing reassuringly. "We'll find him, Fiona. There must be an explanation." The sheriff nodded. "I hope so, for his sake. 3 witnesses saw him enter the saloon. None saw him leave by the main entrance. And this morning my deputy found blood on the back steps leading to the alley." "Blood?" Fiona whispered. "Is Thomas hurt?" "We don't know, Miss Jackson, but if he's innocent he needs to come forward. Soon." After the sheriff and his deputies left, promising to keep them informed, Fiona collapsed into a chair, her mind reeling. Kyle knelt beside her, his face grave with concern. "I don't believe Thomas did this," he said firmly. But we need to find him before the sheriff does. If he's wounded and hiding, he could die out there. Fiona nodded, grateful for Kyle's faith in her brother. Where do we start? I know these lands better than anyone. If he's hiding in Dallas County, I'll find him. Kyle stood, his decision made. I'll gather some men I trust. We'll begin searching immediately. For 3 days, Kyle and his ranch hands combed the countryside while Fiona alternated between waiting anxiously at the Double R and returning to her own ranch in case Thomas sought shelter there. There was no sign of him. The sheriff's investigation continued. With mounting evidence against Thomas, the blood on the stairs had proven to be Devlin's, and a witness had come forward claiming to have heard Thomas threaten Devlin weeks earlier. On the 4th morning, as Fiona sat on the Double R porch watching the sunrise with growing despair, a rider approached from the east, not from the direction of town or her ranch. As he drew closer, she recognized with shock that it was Thomas himself, slumped in the saddle, his clothes dirty and torn. "Thomas," she cried, running to meet him as he nearly fell from his horse. His face was gaunt, his eyes feverish. "Fiona, I didn't kill him. You have to believe me." "I do," she assured him, helping him toward the house. "But where have you been? Everyone's looking for you." "Hiding," he gasped. "In the old Miller cabin by the creek. I was there when Devlin was killed." Kyle appeared from the barn, alerted by Fiona's cry. He rushed to help support Thomas into the house, where they laid him on a sofa. Mrs. Abernathy brought water and began examining a deep cut on Thomas's arm that had been roughly bandaged. "Tell us what happened," Kyle said, once Thomas had drunk some water. "I went to town after getting supplies," Thomas began, his voice weak. "I meant to just buy some tobacco and new socks, but I ran into Jimmy Porter." Fiona groaned. Jimmy had been Thomas's gambling companion in the past. He said there was a game at the back room of the Mercantile. Small stakes. Thomas looked ashamed. "I know I promised, but I thought, just one game to prove to myself I could walk away." "Did you play?" Kyle asked, his tone neutral. "No, I got as far as the door, heard the cards being shuffled, and I remembered my promise to you both." Thomas's eyes sought Fiona's. "I turned around and left, but on my way back to my horse, I passed Devlin's saloon. He was standing on the balcony watching me. He called out, said I was a fool to trust Ryder, that he'd ruin me just like he'd ruined others." Thomas paused, coughing. "Mrs. Abernathy pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. "I ignored him, kept walking, but he followed me down to the street. Said he had proof that Kyle had actually killed Sarah Collins, that he'd make sure everyone knew it. That once the truth came out, the partnership would collapse and I'd be back in debt to him." Kyle's expression darkened, but he remained silent, letting Thomas continue. "I told him to leave me alone, that I didn't believe his lies. He grabbed my arm and I pushed him away. Hard. He fell against the hitching post. There was blood on his forehead." Thomas swallowed painfully. "People saw. I panicked and ran. Rode straight for the Miller cabin where our pa used to take us fishing. I've been hiding there ever since, afraid to come back." "But you didn't shoot him," Fiona pressed. "No, I swear it. I left him alive in the street. Someone else must have killed him later." Kyle and Fiona exchanged glances. "We need to get you to the sheriff," Kyle said. "Tell him exactly what you just told us." "He'll never believe me," Thomas protested weakly. "Not with witnesses saying I went into the saloon." "Did you," Kyle asked sharply, "go into the saloon at all?" "No, I never set foot inside. Our confrontation was on the street in front of the saloon." Kyle's expression cleared. "Then there's hope. The witnesses must be lying." He stood. "I'll go for the sheriff myself. Fiona, stay with your brother. Mrs. Abernathy, that arm needs proper tending." Within the hour, Sheriff Taylor arrived with his deputies. Thomas repeated his story, his voice stronger after food and Mrs. Abernathy's care. The sheriff listened skeptically. "It's a convenient tale, Jackson, but I've got 3 men who saw you enter that saloon." "Who are these witnesses?" Kyle asked. "I'd like to speak with them myself." The sheriff hesitated, then consulted his notebook. "Jim Barlow, Pete Carson, and a gambler called Ace." Kyle's eyes narrowed. "Barlow and Carson both owe money to Devlin's estate, and Ace worked for Devlin as a dealer." "That doesn't mean they're lying," the sheriff argued. "No, but it means they had reason to." Kyle leaned forward. "Sheriff, I believe someone is framing Thomas. Someone who stood to gain from Devlin's death and needed a convenient suspect." "That's a serious accusation, Ryder." "I know, and I intend to prove it." Kyle's voice carried the authority of his Ranger days. "Give me 24 hours before you arrest Thomas. Let me investigate these witnesses." The sheriff stroked his whiskers, considering. "You were a good Ranger, Ryder, one of the best, but this isn't your jurisdiction anymore." "Please," Fiona interjected. "My brother is injured." "He came back voluntarily. He's not running." Finally, the sheriff nodded. 24 hours, Ryder. But Jackson stays here under guard. If you find nothing, he comes in." After the sheriff left, posting a deputy on the porch, Kyle prepared to ride to town. Fiona followed him to the stable, her heart heavy with worry. "Be careful," she urged as he saddled his stallion. "If someone's willing to kill Devlin and frame Thomas, they might come after you too." Kyle paused, turning to face her. His expression softened as he gazed down at her. "I'll be careful." He hesitated, then added, "Before all this happened, you were coming to give me an answer, weren't you?" Despite the circumstances, Fiona felt a smile touch her lips. "Yes." "And?" His eyes searched hers. "And I was going to say that despite everything, despite how quickly it's all happened, I love you, Kyle Ryder." The joy that lit his face was like sunrise breaking over the plains. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. "I'll come back to you, Fiona. I promise. And we'll make this right." She lifted her face to his, and their kiss held all the promise of the future they both wanted if only they could overcome this last obstacle. Kyle rode hard for Dallas, his mind focused on the task ahead. The witnesses were the key. If they were lying about seeing Thomas enter the saloon, then someone had orchestrated this frame-up carefully. But who stood to gain from Devlin's death? His first stop was the bank, where he found Harold Wilson, the manager who had handled Devlin's business affairs. Wilson was a nervous man with ink-stained fingers who became even more nervous when Kyle questioned him about Devlin's estate. "Who inherits?" Kyle asked directly. Wilson hesitated. "I'm not sure I should. A man's life is at stake," Kyle interrupted. "Thomas Jackson is innocent, and I mean to prove it." Wilson's resolve crumbled. "Very well. Mr. Devlin's will leave everything to his sister in St. Louis, except for the saloon, which goes to his business partner, Mr. Edward Hughes." Kyle frowned. "Hughes? I didn't know Devlin had a partner." "It was a silent arrangement. Mr. Hughes provided capital but stayed in the background." Wilson lowered his voice. "Between us, Mr. Ryder, Mr. Hughes was pressuring Devlin to buy him out. They'd had quite a falling out." "Where can I find Hughes?" "He keeps rooms above the dressmaker's shop. Rarely seen in public." Kyle's next stop was the saloon itself, now closed pending the murder investigation. The deputy guarding the door recognized Kyle from his Ranger days and allowed him inside after some persuasion. The scene of the crime was Devlin's office on the second floor. Bloodstains still darkened the expensive carpet where Devlin had fallen. Kyle examined the room carefully, looking for anything the sheriff might have missed. The bullet had struck Devlin in the chest, killing him almost instantly according to Doc Williams' assessment. It had passed through his body and lodged in the wall behind his desk. The sheriff had dug out evidence that might hang Thomas if Kyle couldn't find the truth. A search of Devlin's desk revealed little until Kyle noticed a false bottom in the top drawer. Inside was a small notebook filled with names and numbers debts owed, Kyle realized, some marked as paid or transferred. Thomas's name appeared with the notation sold to KR beside it. Flipping through the pages, Kyle found Edward Hughes' name with a large sum next to it, followed by the words partnership dissolution refused. Kyle pocketed the notebook and continued his investigation, questioning the bartender who had been working the night of the murder. The man confirmed he hadn't seen Thomas inside the saloon that evening, though he had witnessed the confrontation outside that Thomas had described. Mr. Devlin came back in after that, the bartender said. He was bleeding from his head where he'd hit the post, real angry. Went straight up to his office and told me to send Jim Barlow and Pete Carson up if they came in. And did they? Yes, sir, about an hour later. Then that gambler Ace joined them. They were up there maybe 15 minutes, then came down looking mighty pleased with themselves. Said Mr. Devlin wanted to be left alone to work. Did you see anyone else go up after that? The bartender hesitated. Well, yes. Mr. Hughes went up around 9. I thought it strange because those two hadn't been speaking for weeks. What time was Devlin killed? Doc Williams said between 9 and 10, based on when he was found. The cleaning woman discovered him at 10:30. Kyle thanked the bartender and headed for the dressmaker's shop. Edward Hughes wasn't in his rooms, but the shopkeeper said he'd packed hastily that morning, mentioning a trip to San Antonio. The pieces were beginning to fit together in Kyle's mind. He tracked down Jim Barlow at the livery stable, confronting him directly about his false testimony. I saw Thomas Jackson go into that saloon, Barlow insisted nervously. No, you didn't, Kyle said firmly. You saw him argue with Devlin on the street. Then later, you and Carson went up to Devlin's office where he paid you to lie about seeing Thomas enter the saloon. Barlow's face paled. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. And I think you know that Edward Hughes killed Devlin after you and Carson left. Kyle stepped closer, his voice lowering. Accessory to murder carries almost the same penalty as murder itself, Barlow. The man broke, confession spilling out in a terrified rush. It wasn't supposed to be murder. Devlin just wanted Jackson blamed for beating him up. Said Jackson had humiliated him and deserved some jail time. He paid us to say we saw him come inside. That's all I know, I swear. But Hughes came up after you left. Maybe. I don't know nothing about that. Please, Mr. Ryder, I got a family. Kyle left Barlow shaking and found Pete Carson drinking in a different saloon across town. Carson's confession matched Barlow's. Devlin had paid them to lie, nothing more. The gambler known as Ace proved more difficult, but when confronted with the other's confessions, he too admitted the truth. Armed with these statements and the evidence from Devlin's notebook, Kyle went to the sheriff. Taylor listened skeptically at first, but as Kyle laid out the evidence, the dissolution dispute, the false witnesses, Hughes' hasty departure, his expression grew more serious. You're saying Hughes killed his own partner over a business disagreement, then framed Thomas Jackson for it? Yes. And I can prove it if you'll send telegrams to the stations between here and San Antonio. Hughes can't have gotten far yet. The sheriff nodded slowly. I'll do it, and I'll release Thomas Jackson into your custody pending Hughes' capture. By nightfall, a telegram arrived from a town 30 miles south. Edward Hughes had been detained while trying to board a stage for San Antonio. In his possession was a Colt .45 that matched the bullet that killed Devlin, and a large sum of cash from the saloon safe. Thomas was fully exonerated, though his reputation in town would take time to recover. Kyle insisted he continue managing the western section of the Double R, showing the community that his trust in Thomas remained unshaken. 2 weeks later, with the scandal beginning to fade, Kyle invited Fiona to ride with him to a hillside overlooking the most beautiful part of the Double R Range. The autumn air was crisp, the sky a perfect Texas blue as they dismounted near a stand of live oaks. "I wanted to show you something," Kyle said, taking her hand and leading her to the crest of the hill. From there, they could see miles of rolling grassland, dotted with cattle and crossed by a clear stream. In the distance, the main house of the Double R stood proudly, smoke curling from its chimneys. "It's beautiful," Fiona said, breathing in the scent of sage and open space. "I bought this land when I left the Rangers," Kyle told her, "when everything I believed in seemed tarnished. I needed something clean and true to build." He turned to face her. "What I didn't realize was that land alone isn't enough. It takes more to build a home." Fiona's heart quickened as he took both her hands in his. "I love you, Fiona Jackson. When I saw Devlin trying to take your freedom, I acted on instinct. But getting to know you these past weeks has shown me that my instincts were right." He smiled softly. "You're the strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, and if you'll have me, I want to spend my life with you." Tears welled in Fiona's eyes as Kyle reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Inside was a ring with a perfect diamond catching the autumn sunlight. "Will you marry me, Fiona? Will you help me turn this land into our home?" "Yes," she whispered, her voice catching. "Yes, Kyle Ryder. I will." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and drew her into his arms, Fiona thought of the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the brink of servitude to the promise of a shared future. From fear to love, it had begun with one man's determination to right a wrong, to restore what should never have been taken. Their lips met in a kiss that sealed their promise. There on the hilltop with the Texas sky stretching endlessly above them, and the land that would be their legacy spread out before them. 3 months later, on a clear December day, Fiona Jackson became Fiona Ryder in a ceremony at the Double R Ranch. The house had been transformed with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, the scent of pine mingling with Mrs. Abernathy's cooking as guests from throughout the county gathered to witness the union. Thomas stood proudly as his sister's only attendant, sober and dignified in a new suit. His success managing the western section had begun to rebuild his reputation, and there were whispers that the widow Johnson had set her cap for him. As Fiona spoke her vows, looking into Kyle's loving eyes, she marveled at how life could change so completely in the span of half a year. From the darkest moment of her life had come its greatest joy, a testament to the truth that sometimes freedom wasn't just the absence of chains, but the presence of love. Judge Harmon pronounced them husband and wife, and the assembled guests cheered as Kyle kissed his bride. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and enough food to feed twice their number. Later, as Kyle led his wife up the stairs to the master bedroom, now their bedroom, Fiona paused on the landing. "What is it?" Kyle asked, concern crossing his features. "I was just thinking," she said softly. "That night in Devlin's saloon when everything seemed lost, I never imagined this could be my future." Kyle drew her close, his arms strong and sure around her. "That night, I saw a woman whose spirit couldn't be broken, even when her freedom was threatened. I knew then that you were something special, Fiona Jackson." "Fiona Ryder," she corrected with a smile. "Fiona Ryder," he agreed, kissing her again. "The bravest, most beautiful woman in Texas. And my wife." Spring found the Double R flourishing under their combined care. The partnership between the Jackson Ranch and Kyle's land had produced remarkable results, foals with the best qualities of both bloodlines, expanding herds of cattle, and a reputation that drew buyers from as far as California. Thomas had moved into a proper house built near the western boundary, still managing that section but with greater responsibility and confidence. His courtship of the widow Johnson had progressed to the point where a second wedding seemed likely by summer. One evening, as Fiona and Kyle sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, she rested her head against his shoulder, content in a way she had never thought possible. "I have something to tell you," she said quietly. Kyle turned to look at her, his eyes warm with love. "What is it?" Fiona took his hand and placed it gently over her stomach. "Come autumn, there will be a new rider at the Double R." Joy spread across Kyle's face, followed by wonder as the meaning of her words sank in. "A baby." "We're having a baby," Fiona nodded, laughing as he pulled her into a careful embrace. "Dr. Williams confirmed it yesterday." "Are you happy?" Kyle asked, searching her face. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she assured him. "Our child will grow up free and strong with all this beauty around them." She gestured to the land stretching before them, the legacy they were building together. Kyle kissed her tenderly. "From the moment I saw you in that saloon, I knew I had to help. But I never imagined how much you would end up helping me, healing parts of me I thought were broken forever." "We healed each other," Fiona said softly. "And now we'll build our future one day at a time." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Texas sky in deepening shades of purple, Kyle held his wife close, marveling at the journey that had brought them here. From a desperate gamble to save a stranger's freedom to the profound love that now bound them together, some debts, it seemed, could never truly be paid, only transformed into something far more precious. In the warm twilight of their home, with the promise of new life growing between them, Kyle and Fiona Ryder watched night fall over the land they loved, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together free, strong, and deeply in love.